Over 1 million tickets have been sold for the Rugby World Cup in September. That brings the sales to around the equivalent of 165 million American dollars. You may ask yourself, why is this important? Rugby is on the rise in America, and it looks to bring in billions of spectators this September. It is also the fastest growing sport in America. It's already surpassed hockey and lacrosse as the fastest growing team sports in America. Not only does it attract men, but also women and children. And as I stated before, Rugby World Cup is this September in New Zealand. It has also been added to the 2016 Olympics, and I hope to give you a brief overview and a little bit more understanding of this sport. Myself, I have played rugby for the last 3 years, watched many matches on television, and know most of the basics of the game, and would like to share that with you. The rules are very similar to football, and many think it's a very dangerous sport, but it is gaining popularity in America and around the world. And with the World Cup later this year, I believe that everybody should have a little understanding of it. So, first of all, the sport may seem confusing to many, but the rules are a lot like American football. According to the International Rugby Board, the governing body for international rugby, teams are played by 15 players on each side, and the game spans 2 40-minute halves. Unlike football, players do not wear any pads or helmets. The field that rugby is played on is actually called the rugby pitch, not the rugby field. And it's a lot similar to soccer. It's also called the pitch. And instead of the end zones, they're called tri-zones. And they also have goalposts similar to American football. In the gameplay of rugby, there are no forward passes, only lateral and backwards passes. So that's the main difference, along with not having any pads. In rugby, there are no breaks. Once a player is tackled, gameplay continues, and it's very exhausting. One of the main differences in rugby and football is scoring a try, which is similar to a touchdown. For a try to be scored, you must run into the try zone and touch it on the ground. In football, you just merely have to break the plane. In rugby, you will not be awarded any points for breaking the plane. When a try is awarded, the team is given 5 points and may convert a kick for 2 points to the uprights. Moving on, the fact that rugby players wear very little protective equipment may lead you to believe that injuries occur often. This is merely a myth. The misconception that minimal protective equipment leads to a higher injury rate than football players who wear much more protective equipment is simply not true. Dr. Lyle McKelly, an associate professor of orthopedic surgery at Harvard University, conducted a study and found that rugby players receive fewer injuries than football, and this is due to the increased awareness of the exposure of their body. Simply put, the players in football feel much more protected because they wear pads and helmets. This study, conducted by Dr. McKelly, concluded that rugby players' injury rates was only 10% compared to the 52% that was experienced in the NCAA football. Dr. McKelly also states that subsequent similar studies have confirmed his findings. And this certifies that rugby is not more dangerous, but contrarily causes less injuries. Lastly, the most important tournament of this sport is fast approaching, the World Cup. This will be played in New Zealand starting this September. The Rugby World Cup is the 3rd largest sporting event in the world, following the Olympics and the Soccer World Cup. The broadcast from New Zealand looks to draw over 4 billion viewers this year. And much like the Soccer World Cup, Rugby World Cup is played every 4 years. But unlike the Soccer World Cup, this will only be the 7th Rugby World Cup ever played. The first tournament was played in Eden Park in New Zealand in 1987. This was won by the New Zealand All Blacks. And this tournament is also very important to many countries. Rugby is the national sport for many countries, unlike America. And the passion these countries have for rugby can seem in films like Invictus. In Invictus, it follows the South African team in the 1995 World Cup, where they were heavily favored against by the New Zealand All Blacks. In this movie, you may remember that the South African Springboks won the World Cup in the last minute and brought together a country that was in the midst of a racial turmoil. But the sport of rugby is a fascinating sport and it crosses all cultural boundaries worldwide. So let me close by saying, I hope that after my time with you, you have gained a little better understanding of the game. Now let's revisit the main points we talked about today. The rules of rugby are somewhat like that of American football. In rugby, it does not have a higher injury rate than football. The nationwide and worldwide popularity of the sport continues to grow as we approach the largest tournament in this rugby community, the World Cup. And I'll leave you with this. So come to September, will you be supporting your country in the World Cup?